I don't just want to hear myself talk. I love questions and would like to make this a dialogue. So please interrupt me, unmute yourself, ask me questions. I'll watch the chat function as well if you want to ask me questions that way. But as your professor was mentioning, the goal here is to make this useful for you. So the best way we can do that is to ask each other questions. So just a little bit of background about me. My name is Hannah Scott. I am the program manager of a center in the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Science that focuses on the cooperative business model. And often what that means is we do education about cooperatives to the university community as well as the public and to special groups like farmers, for example. We also do applied research on the cooperative business model. So a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today in terms of ag co-ops is from a researcher that we are collaborating with right now at Cleveland State University to think about how ag co-ops have changed over time. And then we do extension work. And a big part of our work is to provide technical assistance to people who want to learn more about the cooperative model and think it might help them solve some kind of challenge that they're facing. So maybe that challenge is accessing new markets for their produce, or maybe that challenge is getting a year-round consistent supply of product that allows them to enter, for example, grocery stores, because people don't buy things at the grocery store in one season, right? They buy all year round. Maybe that challenge is in making their transactions more efficient. So for example, we've worked with producers who are working with their county school systems, and a school system purchasing is, that's a unique supply chain in and of itself. It can be often quite difficult to access that supply chain. And so lowering the transaction costs of that is something that's of interest both to the school as well as to producers who are trying to access the school. So I want to talk to you today about kind of all of those things, but focused on agriculture. My background is very much like what your professor was describing some of your backgrounds as. I come from Southern Ohio, family farm. My family raises cattle, row crops, forage crops, and hops. That was really my first introduction to cooperatives, was my family farm. My brother is a graduate of ATI, so I'm very familiar with ATI. So I'm excited to be with you today. So I'm going to share my screen. But again, I want to encourage you to ask me questions. And I'm not going to be able to see much when I share my screen. So you might have to unmute and tell me. I'll monitor the chat box still though. So I'm going to enter the slideshow. So you all can see my screen?
Yes. When you are done, please go ahead and send me the PowerPoint slide so that I can share it with the students. Absolutely. And also, as you offered to take one question, when you talk about supply chains, some of our students are also interested in animal products, in producing and supplying animals to the market. So the question is, are there any cooperatives that focus on grains versus animal products?
Absolutely.
So you can talk about that as well.
And we will get into the details of that. So please ask me that as well. So this is just our mission at the Center for Cooperatives. I've already talked a little bit about that. So the first question really is one of the big questions is what is a co-op? So when we think about the unique role for cooperatives in the supply chain, first we need to define a co-op so we can understand what we're talking about. And actually defining a co-op is somewhat more complicated than you might think. There are a couple of different definitions. I have two of the more common ones here on the screen that you can read. I won't read those to you. But really, when we talk about the business model of a cooperative, how a firm conducts business using the cooperative model, there are three things we look at. The first one is that the business is owned by its users. So that's called the user-owner principle. The second one is that the business is controlled by its users. So not only are they the legal owners entitled to the assets of the organization and all of the other rights and responsibilities that come with ownership, they are also entitled to control the organization. And in the cooperative model, that usually means that they exercise their control by voting for a board of directors. And typically they vote on a one member, one vote system. So it's democratic control. That's different than investor-oriented firms, because investor-oriented firms often give control based on the level of investment. In a cooperative, what we're talking about is control based on a one member, one vote principle that is not tied to the level of investment. So that's a key distinction to remember. So user ownership, user control, and then user benefit is the third really kind of foundational definition piece of a cooperative. And when we think about user benefit in a cooperative, we also think about that differently than other business organizations, other types of business. We think about that really in terms of the services and the products that a cooperative can provide to its users, rather than focusing solely on the return on investment that a cooperative can make for its users. So we're focused on really the mission of the cooperative, and that varies depending on what the cooperative is and what they do and who their users are. But their mission is to provide service or to benefit their members through whatever function they serve, rather than through maximizing profit. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those functions are particular to the ag industry.
Just a quick question. Can we think of cooperatives as a nonprofit? Do they register as nonprofit, or do they register as a co-op when it comes to the Secretary of State?
They register it. Well, that's a great question. They register in most states as a cooperative, so that it's a specific type of business in many states. So it's actually, when we get into like the organizational form, it's a type of corporation, but it's a special type of corporation. It is distinct from a nonprofit because a nonprofit actually does not have owners to whom profits of the business can be distributed. Okay. In a cooperative, there are actually owners. Remember, I said those were the users, the people who are the members of the co-op. They are entitled to distributions of the surplus of the cooperative. So that's the key distinction. Does that make sense?
Can you repeat that if I missed that?
Yeah. So the distinction is that in a nonprofit, there aren't actually legal owners who are entitled to the distribution of the profit of the business. All of the profit has to be reinvested in the organization. In a cooperative model, there are legal owners who are entitled to the profit distribution of the business. And those are the members, they're the users.
Kind of like a credit union, correct?
Exactly like a credit union, Stephanie. So a credit union is a type of cooperative. Great point. Other questions? Does that make sense for others? Okay. So we're talking both about a business model in the cooperative model, but we're also talking about really kind of a movement, right? We're talking about organizations, firms that subscribe to and uphold a set of principles that's actually globally recognized. Those principles are here on your screen, and we don't have time to get into all of them, but I want to point out a couple of them that really are, I mean, they're all hallmarks of the cooperative model, but they all impact how the cooperative does business, how it's structured, how it gains equity, how it makes decisions. The big ones that many co-ops tend to focus on are democratic member control. Remember that one member, one vote system that I told you about, rather than control based on investment. That's one of the key distinctions. And then one thing that you'll see, and particularly if you, those of you who farm or are members of credit unions, if you interact with co-ops, and many of us do without even realizing that we do, they rely on member economic participation. So that means that the cooperative gathers equity from its members at the beginning and over time. It also means that the cooperative relies on its members to actually do the business of the cooperative. And we'll talk more about what that means as we look at some examples. Okay. So what functions do cooperatives actually serve? So there are three primary functions, and a lot of this is kind of like, it can be a bit of an academic exercise because cooperatives often do multiple of these functions, but really these are an easy way to think about what cooperatives do. Cooperatives can market products on behalf of their members. So if we think about grain cooperatives, which many of you are probably familiar with, those are marketing cooperatives. They take their members' grain and they market it on behalf of their members to another user in the supply chain. That could be a further processor. It could be exporting of that grain. It could be that the cooperative itself is a further processor. So they actually take the user's grain and they make it into ethanol. They might make it into byproducts of ethanol, all of that. So about 53% of the ag cooperatives in the United States are primarily focused on marketing. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in terms of what they market, but they're primarily focused on marketing. The second function is purchasing. And that really comes down to the idea that when a group of people go together to purchase something, they can be more efficient because they can purchase in larger quantities, realize economies of scale, and then pass that savings on to the group of people who purchase together. So it's really group purchasing. But cooperatives do that on a very large scale in agriculture. So, and you guys can raise your hand or chat this in the box, but how many of you are familiar with, for example, Southern States? It's really a farm supply store throughout the South. Let me check my chat. Is anybody familiar with Southern States Cooperative? They have farm supply stores that sell, oh my gosh, everything from fencing supplies to animal care products, right? Like on-farm, like veterinary supplies, energy, like propane, all those kinds of things. That's a purchasing cooperative, actually. So the members of that co-op who purchase from the co-op are actually owners of the business. They're buying in bulk and they're realizing those savings. So about 42% of ag co-ops are purchasing focused. So their primary function is purchasing on behalf of their members. And then we look at service. So service could be anything from providing agronomy services to a member. It could be, custom application. It could be nutrient testing. It could be soil sampling. I mean, any type of service that you can provide to a farm could be done cooperatively. Credit is one that's really big in agriculture, so credit services. About 5% of ag co-ops are actually focused primarily on service. So that's how we break down what cooperatives do, so how they actually function in the ag sector. But when we look at those marketing cooperatives, one of the questions at the beginning is, what do co-ops market? And so some of you are interested in the grain supply chain, some of you are interested in the livestock supply chain, maybe some of you are interested in other supply chains in agriculture, right? Perhaps dairy or fruits and vegetables or cotton. You can see here, this is a breakdown of cooperatives that have sales of these types of ag commodities. And cooperatives are active really in all types of ag commodities. They're more active in some than in others. So you can see on my slide that cooperatives are very active in grains and oilseeds. So 43% of marketing cooperatives in the US market grains and oilseeds. 7% market livestock. And we'll talk about one of the ones here in Ohio that does a substantial business marketing livestock on behalf of producer members. And you can see the various other types of products that cooperatives market on behalf of their members. Any questions about that breakout?
Which ones are common in Ohio? It would be.
So the most common in Ohio are grains and oilseeds, so grain marketing cooperatives. We also have pretty, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, we have a pretty active livestock marketing cooperative that's actually one of the larger cooperatives in the US. So it's headquartered here in Ohio. And when we look at the question of cooperatives that are active in Ohio, that's a different question than the cooperatives that are headquartered here. So let me pull up my notes here, and I will.
So the cooperatives can we say that the cooperative membership can come from multiple states, like 3 or 4 different states, or even at a national level?
Yes, absolutely. So for example, if we think about a specific cooperative like United Producers, is anybody familiar with UPI, as they're commonly known, or producers throughout Ohio? So United Producers is a livestock marketing cooperative. It's headquartered in Ohio, and it has auction sites throughout Ohio. That co-op actually has over, I think the last time I looked, it was over 30,000 members. And they operate, and those members come from many states. They operate primarily in Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, Missouri, and I think they have operations in Tennessee at this point as well. So a co-op can be anything from that, and we'll talk about even larger cooperatives that are multinational, to a localized co-op. For example, in Worcester, there is a co-op of local producers and consumers called Local Roots. It's a food store, local and natural products food store. That's a hyper-local version of a cooperative, right? They bring products in from producers and they sell to consumers in their community. Both of them are cooperatives in the agriculture space. So there's huge diversity really in the agricultural co-op space. As of 2017, I just pulled up my notes, Ohio had 25 ag marketing co-ops headquartered in the state, 9 supply and service cooperatives. So that's 34 total ag co-ops, and just under 40,000 members in those co-ops.
And co-ops are only for agriculture, right? And farming.
Actually, co-ops can be in any industry. So as Stephanie was mentioning earlier, credit unions, for example, are a type of cooperative. They operate in the finance industry. We see cooperatives active in the credit industry to agriculture as well through the farm credit system. Those are cooperative institutions. We also see co-ops active in electric. So rural electric cooperatives provide electricity to about 42% of the land mass of the United States. There are natural food grocery stores that are cooperatives, everything from, I've seen examples of cooperative funeral parlors all the way to cooperative bicycle repair shops. So really can be very diverse. But if we're thinking about ag co-ops, we're talking about 34 really firms in Ohio that are headquartered in Ohio. But there are firms that are active in the state that are not headquartered here. For example, Farm Credit Mid-America is headquartered in Kentucky, quite active in Ohio. Dairy Farmers of America is headquartered in Kansas City, but also quite active in Ohio. So it really depends on how you kind of look at the supply chain. When I talked about the cooperatives that are active in like marketing, purchasing, and service, I was talking about the number of ag cooperatives who do those functions. But if we look at the role of cooperatives more broadly in the supply chain, so if we think about, for example, how much of the grains in the US are processed and marketed by cooperative, as of 2001, I couldn't find a number that was more recent than this. As of 2001, about 38% of grains in the US were actually processed and marketed by co-ops. When we looked at cotton and cotton seed, that number was about 42%. And then fruits and vegetables, about 19% of fruits and veg processed and marketed by co-ops. If we look at the dairy industry, co-ops are very, very active in the dairy industry. So if we look just at Dairy Farmers of America, which is one of the largest co-ops in the United States, they represent about 30% of total milk production in the United States. So extremely important segments or actors in those.
So one question. Now, if I am a farmer in Ohio, obviously I can join with a cooperative that is headquartered and functioning here in Ohio, or I can join with somebody from, say, Florida or Kentucky or Virginia. What should be the motivation, or what are the motivations that you have seen people to join different cooperatives? Is it just the connections, the word of mouth, or there are some specific differences across the performance, across the the state lines and the type of help they provide and the quality of help that they provide? Have you seen those differences?
Sure. So the first question is really, can you benefit from the services or the functions that the cooperative provides? So for example, at the beginning of the class, I mentioned that my family raises beef cattle and row crops. We do not produce dairy products, right? So my family can't join a dairy cooperative. We're not members that are going to benefit from a dairy cooperative. So that's the first thing, is like, are you going to, are you in the business of whatever the cooperative provides, whatever function the cooperative does? Other factors play in, of course, to those decisions if you are in that industry. So for example, grains and oilseeds. It can be factors like proximity. It can be factors like the quality of service. Really, all the decisions that you make to patronize any business are going to go into whether you patronize and become a part of a cooperative. Yeah. Sometimes it's whether you have options, right? So all of those things will come into play.
Yeah, thank you.
Good question. So if we look at cooperatives generally in the United States, many of us interact with co-ops and we don't even know it. So many of us are members of credit unions and we didn't realize that those were cooperatively organized. Or many of us purchase items that are marketed by marketing cooperatives and we don't even realize it. So these are some of the ones here on the screen that are quite common in the grocery store that sometimes people don't even recognize are farmer-owned cooperatives. So Florida's Natural is actually the brand of a citrus cooperative that's owned by farmers. Same thing for Blue Diamond. That's a brand of a cooperative owned by nut growers. Same thing for Welch's. That's a brand that's owned by a cooperative of grape growers. Ocean Spray, Land O'Lakes, many that you would see in the grocery store. So what you can see here is a way that I like to think about co-ops in agriculture, and that I saw as a quote from an ag economist. Cooperatives really are about extending, cooperatives in agriculture, in the supply chain, are about extending producers' control in the supply chain and their participation in that supply chain, either upstream or downstream, whether that's purchasing or marketing. So really it's about vertical integration in the supply chain, if we want to think about ag co-ops that way, from an economic standpoint, from a supply chain standpoint. Questions about that? Okay. We're going to skip that. But that's a video about ocean spray, and it'll be in the slides that I send you. It's just a kind of an explanation of ocean spray, which is another one of those cooperatives. I'm gonna try to make sure it doesn't play here. But so if we look at the number of cooperatives, and I was mentioning the diversity of cooperatives, and the number of cooperatives actually is larger than many people realize as well. So there is an estimated 64,000 co-ops across the US that employ just over 850,000 employees. And they're really in all kinds of sectors, like I was mentioning earlier. So from commercial sales and marketing to financial services to social and public services to utilities. And we can talk more about those, but we'll focus on agriculture for our purposes today. So if we think about those and where those are located, this is actually from a 2018 study that one of our collaborators did, that I will send you the link to the full report. So we see cooperatives in agriculture clustered in certain areas. And so you can see that the red areas are areas where there are multiple cooperatives headquartered and in counties that also have neighboring counties with cooperative headquarters. So these are hotspots for cooperatives, particularly in headquarters. Now, this doesn't cover like the geographic area that the co-op provides service to. It's where they're headquartered. And then the cold spots there are where there are not cooperative headquarters, surrounded by counties where there are also not cooperative headquarters. So you can see that cooperatives are clustered in certain regions of the United States, particularly in agriculture from this map. And you could see it also from the last map, but this one shows that to you in agriculture. If we think about co-op history too, this will be in the slides as well, but cooperatives have a long, rich history in the United States. They're not a new thing. Some people are surprised to learn that. They maybe just recently heard about cooperatives, or they just recently got involved in the cooperative economy, but cooperatives have been around really since, if we think about cooperative strategies for hunting and gathering, right? They've been around as long as human society has been around. And in agriculture, we see cooperatives really developing along with agriculture, right? People were working in cooperative networks for a very long time. When we start to see formalization of the cooperative business model as compared to like corporations and other ways of organizing firms, is really in the mid 1840s. And then from there, we see cooperatives develop very strongly from that point in the mid 1840s through the 1920s and 1930s. And then from there, we see actually a decline in the number of cooperatives in agriculture. But that's not to say that we see a decline in the amount of business that they do or other factors about them. But we have seen a decline in the number of cooperatives since that time. So this is just kind of an overview of that history. And if you're interested in history and want to learn more about this, let me know, and I can recommend some resources and some authors. Questions about that?
So typically, are these like small scale producers that become members of co-op because they don't have the purchasing power, so they kind of combine together so that they can buy, or even the really big farms with thousands of acres that are kind of renting land from other land trusts or from their neighbors? What is the composition of these co-ops, and what are their motivations? Is it just to save money, or it's kind of more market access? Obviously, they are all there. But in terms of sizes, what would you say? Small farmers, large farmers, or every composition?
That's a great question. And it would depend probably on what the cooperative is doing in the specific cooperative, but really all compositions. So we know, and I'll skip ahead here a little bit. So for example, these are the largest cooperatives in the United States. In 2019, this data was actually just released this week. So we see here, right, some really large organizations. Actually, all of these top 5 would be in the Fortune 500 of firms in the United States, right? So CHS is a grain marketing and energy and Supply Cooperative that has a really vast territory. They're actually a multinational firm. Just about $32 billion in revenue, in gross revenue in 2019. And then you can see the others here. Actually 4 and 5 are in like the wholesale grocery industry. They're not in agriculture. So we can look at the largest firms in many industries where cooperatives work. And I can send you the full list. It's actually from a compilation called the Co-op 100. So it lists the 100 largest cooperatives by revenue in the United States. And here in Ohio, we actually have 3 of those top 100. So United Producers, which I was talking about earlier, is a livestock marketing cooperative. They also provide credit and risk services, risk management services. Heritage Cooperative is a grain marketing and purchasing cooperative. They provide energy, for example, energy services, agronomic services to their members. Buckeye Power is actually an electric cooperative. So Ohio has about 25 electric cooperatives. Buckeye Power is actually a cooperative of those cooperatives that generates power. So those are some of the largest ones in terms of revenue here in Ohio. So if we look at, actually, I mentioned already, like the trends in terms of the number of cooperatives has declined. This is actually a trend that we see in agriculture, as many of you would know, on the farm. So we see declining numbers of farms throughout the 1900s in the United States. We see that in cooperatives in agriculture as well. I mentioned, maybe I didn't mention, there are about, as of 2017, there are about 1,800 ag cooperatives in the United States. But when we look at their gross business volume, that has not been declining, right? We can see when we adjust for inflation from 1965 to 2015, that gross business volume has gone up. We do see a decline after the Great Recession, but that has gone back up from that decline. And then in terms of members, as you were asking me about, we've also seen increases in the number of members of cooperatives. So on average, a cooperative has about 970 some members on average. So some of them are quite large. Like I mentioned, United Producers has tens of thousands of members, but the average cooperative has just under 1,000 members. The average ag co-op, I should say, has just under 1,000 members. Now, if we look at total membership in cooperatives, in ag cooperatives across the US, it's actually just about the same, or maybe even a little bit more than the number of farmers in the United States. That's because many farmers hold memberships in multiple cooperatives. So you can be a member of many cooperatives, and many people are members of multiple cooperatives, again, based on those factors we were talking about earlier in terms of what would assist their business. So from the question that you're asking previously about what types of farms are members of cooperatives, it's pretty diverse. So I can think of examples from our work of cooperatives that are doing marketing on behalf of farmers producing pumpkins or other specialty crops or livestock, meat products, things like that. And those farms are quite small. Many of them are small farmers, what we would consider small farmers in terms of the average size of farms. Some of them are new farmers or beginning farmers. And then we also have large cooperatives that are providing services to not only large farmers, but they're providing services to other co-ops, and then all the way down to small farmers as well. So a dairy marketing cooperative, for example, could provide marketing services to very large dairy farms all the way down to small dairy farms. I haven't seen any literature on like the average size or common characteristics of certain cooperatives, but I think it would vary depending on the co-op. That's a good question. Other questions about
So just a general question. So I know that they are all joining these co-ops so that they can have some type of purchasing power when it comes to inputs or selling power when it comes to outputs that they produce. What about the profits? Have there been any studies that if I join a cooperative, I can improve my overall farm profitability like that? I don't know whether your slides are addressing it in the near future, but I'm just asking.
Yeah, so we'll talk about total equity in the cooperative in a couple of minutes and trends regarding equity in cooperatives. But actually that hotspot map that I was showing you previously actually shows that in those regions where there are cooperative hotspots, farmers have greater revenue in those counties compared to counties where there are not cooperative headquarters, right? So that leads us to believe that there are impacts on the supply chain. There's also a theory in cooperative economics, I guess you can call it, called the yardstick theory, that not only are the members of cooperatives potentially benefiting from the existence of cooperatives in the marketplace, right, through access to markets, through perhaps enhanced profitability, decreased supply costs, those types of things, but also that non-members are benefiting from the existence of the cooperative in the market because the cooperative itself's presence in the marketplace actually raises prices for the larger marketplace. So that theory is I would have to pull the literature on that to get you the actual economists who first came up with it, but that's called the co-op yardstick theory as well. So not only do members, cooperative yardstick.
Yardstick, okay.
Yeah. So not only do members potentially benefit from enhanced profitability or access to markets or reduced supply costs, but also that the larger marketplace of non-members also benefits. Other questions about that?
I have one.
Yeah.
In these charts that you've shown us, so the numbers have gone up as well as the business engagement for the cooperatives. But in the first chart you showed, it shows a decrease in the amount of total cooperatives that are in operation.
Right.
Why is that? Are they becoming more condensed and focusing on different things?
Yes, so you actually anticipated my next slide. Great job. So we are seeing increased mergers and acquisitions activities in the cooperative space. It's actually a little bit less than we see in other just general business firms in the US, just a couple of percentage points less annually. But over the last number of decades, you can see here since 1980, there have been a lot of mergers or combinations, business combinations in agricultural cooperatives. So we see, for example, we saw an example of this. I mean, we see examples of it all the time, but in Ohio, a couple of years ago, True Point Cooperative merged with Sunrise Cooperative, and Sunrise Cooperative is the surviving cooperative, has a very large presence across the state. And so what we saw was the membership and the equity and assets of those organizations, of those co-ops combined. So we went down one co-op in terms of the pure number of co-ops in the state, but that doesn't mean that we lost the equity or the business activity that the cooperatives provided. So that's a good question.
Thank you. With that, I actually have a follow-up question. Just the way that you described the merging, are there regulations that are set on those to avoid something like, say, monopolizing a specific industry, say dairy or something like that?
Good question. So cooperatives and antitrust regulations, right? The regulations in the United States that regulate concentration of power, for example, monopoly power or restraints of trade. There's a unique relationship with cooperatives. So cooperatives are like all other businesses. They can't monopolize an industry. They can't participate in unfair trade practices, for example. And we've seen examples of the Department of Justice's antitrust division pursuing action against cooperatives like any other business. But there are also some unique exemptions for agricultural cooperatives to be able to conduct cooperative business without being in violation of antitrust rules. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I can send some resources if you want to reach out to me afterwards.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So co-ops, like every other business, are not supposed to monopolize an industry, and actually are regulatory-wise at the federal level, there are regulations that are supposed to protect against that. So I was mentioning that the business volume of cooperatives hasn't decreased. So here we can see, for example, their total assets, total liabilities, and average total equity. So you can see that those have gone up over time as well. This graph is from 2000 to 2016. And again, it's specific to agricultural cooperatives. Let me actually stop sharing my screen and pull up my notes here to share with you that. So I was looking at the actual numbers. So let's think about what are the actual total assets. We could see it going up there. So as of 2016, the inflation adjusted total assets for cooperatives is about $82.5 billion. And total equity in 2016, inflation adjusted, about $36.5 billion. And what's interesting about that equity, right, in agricultural co-ops that we should remember is that that's equity that's of the farmer members. So that's equity that's owned by, that represents the ownership share of farmer members in these businesses. So that can be substantial, right?
I have a quick question. Now, looking at the cooperative industry as a whole really helps, because that kind of shows the students, how big the industry is and how they can make use of that channel for marketing their products. Now, we have about 12 minutes left, so I want to make use of the time a little differently now. Can you give some examples of good activities or not so good activities, and some activities that were successful, some of the efforts that were not successful among the cooperatives that you have seen, that you have worked with? And if many of our students, down the road, they may be running their own family farm. So what advice would you give to them when it comes to joining a cooperative, when it comes to evaluating the cooperative structure and the benefits that they can get? I would like to focus on it because we have only 10 more minutes. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. So actually, you also kind of anticipated one of my next slides.
Okay.
So let me share that again. So a lot of these co-ops I was mentioning are large actors in their supply chain, but we also see cooperatives, and that's not to say that they don't have impacts on local supply chains, right? A farmer in Ohio can benefit from even these really large organizations, really large cooperatives that I was mentioning. But they can also potentially benefit from small cooperatives that engage in supply chains at a scale that is maybe hyper-local or even regionally based. So some farmers that we're seeing engage cooperatives anew, maybe they haven't been engaging cooperatives before, are doing so in the food hub space. So this is a space where specialty crop producers or dairy producers who are marketing consumer products like cheese or milk directly to consumers, or livestock producers who are marketing meat directly to consumers, are coming together to do so in a way that is a shorter supply chain that retains more of the dollars spent on that food at the localized level. About 18% of food hubs in the US are actually organized as co-ops in 2017. And so that's a space where I've done a lot of work over the last couple of years in thinking about and helping groups of farmers who want to engage in localized supply chains, right? They want to do sales directly to consumers, maybe at the regional level, or they want to do sales to schools in their county, or maybe they want to do sales across Ohio, but they don't have the distribution network, that type of thing. So cooperatives are also a way for those people to engage in the marketplace in a way that provides benefits. So for example, one of the co-ops we worked with in the last 4 or 5 years is a group of pumpkin growers who were thinking about how to access very large retailers to sell their locally produced pumpkins with the stamp that they were Ohio produced local pumpkins in big retail stores. Those big retailers market lots of pumpkins. And actually in our region, they were asking for more pumpkins than a single farm was producing or could produce without taking on a lot of risk to the single farm. And so we, along with some colleagues in Extension, worked with those farmers to explore the opportunity for them to form a co-op so that multiple farms together could supply those retailers with pumpkins without taking on too much risk on an individual basis. And so they've actually been selling pumpkins to big retailers since 2016. And that's a small co-op. It started, I think, with 5 farmers, and now it's got 7, I want to say. I have to go back to my notes to remember for sure. But that is allowing those farmers to actually market to a channel that they wouldn't be able to market to on their own, either maybe because they don't have time. Many of the farmers that we talked to said, yeah, I'm interested in this because I don't have time to go around knocking on doors to make these sales myself. I'd like to pool my resources with other farmers to help do that. The other function is what happens, for example, when one farm experiences a crop loss and can't deliver the pumpkins that they said they were going to a retailer. Their opportunity to deliver pumpkins the next year is probably severely limited. So, they're probably likely to lose that account. But as a group, if one farmer experiences a crop loss, the other members of the cooperative can come together and fill that customer's orders so that the group doesn't lose it. And we actually saw that happen in the early years of that co-op. So that's how that group benefited. So
the losses would have to be borne only by that particular farmer, right? It's not like the cooperative will kind of share their profits with him as well, whoever lost the crop.
So the co-op shares profits or surplus is based on the amount of business that individual members do with the cooperative. So in a cooperative of 5 farmers, if all 5 of them do equal amounts of business with the co-op, then they share equally. But that's probably unlikely because they'll probably do varying amounts of business. Maybe one farm does the majority of the business. They would be entitled to a larger share of the profits than a farm that only participates in the cooperative to a minimal extent. So it's called patronage, and it's one of also the hallmarks of the financial setup of cooperatives. So the advantages and limitations really of co-ops are here on your screen, which I think was kind of part of what your question was getting to. What are some things that co-ops do well, and what are some things they don't do well? So they pool resources. And we've been talking about that, right? They can allow for bargaining power or reducing individual risk or market access for smaller units, like small farmers, in a way that is controlled by those farmers, right? The farmers are the owners and the people who vote in the co-op. But co-ops also are kind of complicated. So when I'm thinking with groups of farmers who are trying to figure out if a co-op might help solve a problem that they're facing, these are some of the questions that we talk about. Is everybody willing to share, control, and profits? And does it make sense? Which the answer to that is no in some certain instances. Economists talk about cooperatives thriving in contexts of market failure. So in contexts where there's unequal bargaining power or unequal information, cooperatives can help fill a need there, but there's, maybe there's not that need in the marketplace. So sometimes it doesn't make sense for a cooperative to be in that marketplace. Also, financing is different, and that's because of what we talked about at the beginning of class, that co-ops are organized for member benefit, not to maximize profit. And then the complexity of the way they're organized and what they do. And actually, that is my last slide. So I'm happy to take questions, and I know we're close on time for class, but I'm also happy to take questions afterwards too. Here is my email at the top.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you very much. And it was very informative. Actually, I have heard of cooperatives. Actually, in ATI, there is an agricultural cooperatives course. I have never taught it, but I can imagine what are the type of concepts that they will be talking about. I don't know whether you work with those instructors and the people that you do.
Yeah. Okay. So the instructor of that course is actually the director of our center, Dr. Tom Worley. He's an ag economist. Yeah. So sometimes I talk to that class as well.
Okay, you're talking about the Columbus campus, right?
They're actually combined. So
Worcester and Columbus combined. Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I know it is listed as one of the ATA courses here. ATA courses have a number T, and I think that's one of those courses. I think recently they changed it. But anyways, this is kind of, cooperatives are a really good way how the farmers can market their products. And obviously, if you get into the nitty-gritty details, that is what, Hannah just presented, how big the market is, how the things have changed over time. And that was really good to go all the way to 1500s to see, how it has evolved. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. That was very well done. Now, one question from me, and I'm sure I would like other students to ask questions as well. And typically students stay around even after 1:35. So I take the liberty of asking the one question now. What are the tax implications? I mean, do people save money by joining a co-op, and it is some kind of a pass-through income? It is some type of an LLC that they can protect their private assets, personal assets. What are your thoughts on that?
It's complicated, but yeah, so co-ops are an entity that is single taxed, typically. They take advantage of that. So the profits can be taxed either at the co-op level or at the member level, but not both. They don't have to be taxed at both. There are instances where certain income of the co-op would be taxed at both. But the co-op is a separate entity from the farm that is a member. So you asked about, like, for example, an LLC. So actually what makes thinking about co-ops and the number of co-ops in the US difficult is that LLCs could also follow co-op principles and be organized as a co-op. So it's not just that, for example, in some states, maybe the way that co-ops organize is different. It's set out under state law. And so in some places, it might make sense for a cooperative to be organized legally as an LLC. But the cooperative is a separate entity when it's incorporated as such. If it's incorporated as a separate entity, it's separate from the farm.
So the question is, should only LLCs can join the co-op, or even sole proprietors, really small operators can join the co-op as well?
Yeah, so co-ops can usually, membership is open to individuals as well as entities that are eligible. So like if a farm is organized as an LLC or a corporation, it could also be a member of the cooperative. Yeah,
that's a really good point. So questions from the students. This is your opportunity to ask questions, and I'm sure Hannah is with OSU, and she is moving a little closer from, I believe you're in Piketon, and now you're moving into Columbus, right? So
I'm in my office is in Piketon, but we work all across the state. So
so she
answer questions.
Yeah, sure. She has been with OSU for a long time, so I'm sure she will be interested in answering your questions even beyond this particular class and lecture. Sure. That's what I'm trying to say. So go ahead. Megan asked questions. Stephanie made a couple of comments. Questions from other students, please. Do you see the value of how cooperatives can be an important supply chain for the farmers?
Yeah, that's something I would love to ask students.
Yeah. So And
I was going to say, I took the cooperative class last semester, and having this food supply chain class and the cooperative, I highly recommend it, especially with the connections, because you never know later down the line as a self-made entrepreneur how it's going to help me later down. So I knew everything that you're talking about, Hannah, and now that I've taken this food supply chain course, I'm seeing the connections.
Good.
So I can say firsthand, I see it.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. That's really true. You know, oftentimes when you go through all these different courses in your studies, there are lots of individual dots and points, and it's your responsibility to connect them together. Okay, and that's exactly what Stephanie is doing, and that's exactly what every student should also, expect to do. Because you see something in economics class, something in your marketing class, something else in your, say, animal production class. Now you have to make those connections, and that's a really good thing. And given the pandemic out there, I want to keep it interesting as well. So it kind of went really well. Other questions from the students, please? Jeff, Cassidy, Matt. I hope you're all there. It's not like you just logged in and left somewhere. Autumn, Zane, Kerrigan, Cole, Emma, Logan. Go ahead, please. Andrew. I called upon every name, I think.
Am I allowed to ask another question?
Sure, please.
Okay. For a career path, why co-op? Why was that something you chose?
That's a good question. My particular interest and background is in rural sociology. So that's what my academic training was in. So my undergraduate degree was in sociology and my master's degree was in rural sociology. And so I have a real interest in the development of rural communities. And I saw co-ops as an opportunity to help develop rural communities in a way that allowed for local ownership and wealth building. And so that's why I got interested in kind of startup co-ops, and then just became more and more interested in the way that cooperatives engage in agriculture and really all sectors to the benefit of the people who use them. So that's my interest. But then also cooperatives are like other businesses, right? They have lots and lots of career options. So everything from marketing to accounting to attorneys work at cooperatives.
So I have one quick question on that. You have something to take care of?
Sorry.
You're going to watch a Netflix film, I think. So maybe we'll watch it on the side.
There's a repair person just came. So sorry about that.
That's okay. The question is, what's it called? The people, the employees. How many full-time employees will be there? Obviously, Land O'Lakes will have thousands, hundreds and thousands of employees, and small cooperatives need at least one secretary or somebody like that, right? Would you say that?
So some small co-ops operate completely based on volunteer work from their members. So a lot of the startups that we see in ag co-ops operate based on volunteer labor. But the total number of employees in the U.S. From some estimates in like 2016 and 2017 is about 850,000 employees of co-ops generally. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the co-ops can range from very small size to really large size, and accordingly, it will take a lot of efforts. And there's a lot of goodwill, and often the leaders within the community, they are the ones that are getting together and forming it and making it, running it happen. And that's where the entrepreneurship and the leadership qualities also come through. So if Megan is interested in, say running a co-op or something, developing those leadership qualities can become handy as well. I just wanted to mention that. Anyways, we are at 140 mark. Thank you very much, Hannah. I really appreciate that. And students, please show your, thumbs up signs. Nobody has kind of turned on your camera, so I'm a little disappointed. I totally forgot your faces, actually, to be honest.
But anyways, that's fine. Thank you very much. Hannah, I will be in touch, and down the road, you may be able to, be participating in other areas as well. But then you are recently moving, right? You mentioned you are moving into FAPE, so into a different department. So your responsibilities and other things will be different. So, hopefully somebody else will take up your position later.
Yeah, we actually went through a kind of consolidation in 2017. So no more moves on the front there. So I'm around if students want to ask questions. My email will be in the PowerPoints that I sent.
Yeah, no problem. Just send me the PowerPoint slides. I will share it with the students. Thank you very much. Now go ahead, take care of your TV and Netflix. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Everybody is welcome to log out. Thank you now. Bye.